"Are you really that afraid of the basement?" my boyfriend asked, almost casually, putting on his button-up shirt. I glared back at him. "You're seriously going to bring this up now? I'm getting ready for brunch," I said grumpily, pulling on my bra. He shrugged apologetically. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? I just want to know why, especially if it's such a big issue. We can talk about it whenever you want, but I'd really like to talk about it eventually." His tone was calm, filled with sincere concern. I sighed. I felt my annoyance slip. I'd been avoiding the subject for so long. I really didn't want to bring it up, but Timothy had been so great. We'd been living together for over a year now, and he'd been very patient with me and my phobia of dark places. I don't just mean I'm afraid of the dark. I mean I go into full-on panic attack mode and start tearing up the walls with my bare hands and fingernails and teeth if I even get closed into a dark place. It makes going out at night or doing anything normal, like going to the cinema or the planetarium or a bar or a club, very difficult. I have a nightlight in every room in my apartment, and so plenty of backups, plus the flashlights, the candles, the lighter, pound of fresh batteries of all sizes. Of course, my smartphone can also function as a flashlight. I could go on, but suffice to say, I'm surrounded by as much light as possible. This was also why we were meeting Tim's parents for brunch in broad daylight, and not for dinner. Never dinner. I didn't leave the house once it got too close to sunset. I mostly drive wherever I need to go. Taking public transport is too risky, and I don't travel very much or very far. I also can't go into a bathroom that has no natural light and nothing but motion sensor-based lights. If they go out for just a few seconds, my heart races, my blood boils from fear, and my lungs burn with panic. I scream and run, crying usually until I'm back in the light. I'm very lucky to have Tim around. Unlike my previous boyfriends, he never made snide remarks about my phobia, even when it disrupts his schedule. His effortless patience was a stark contrast to my previous relationships. I'd never seen him so much as raise his voice. I slowly sat on the edge of the bed. "Okay, I'll tell you why. Right now, actually, if you'd like. I'd rather just spit it out. We have a few minutes, and it's not a very long story anyway." Timothy quickly pulled on his sock and came to sit next to me. I looked at him and then looked back down at the bed. I've never told this to anybody, but the reason I'm so afraid of the dark, of being alone, is because of what happened to me in the basement when I was 10 years old. I paused, and Tim took my hand. His fingers were rough and warm. I'd never had issues with the dark or the basement or anything like that before. One day my mom asked me to go down and fetch the laundry from the dryer. So I've been down in the basement of this house a billion times, and I think nothing of it at all. The door creaks loudly, just like normal, as I open it. I lazily walk down the steps and was busy messing around with my new Walkman when I suddenly heard the door slam shut behind me. I yelled and was plunged into darkness, so pure I thought I'd gone blind. I groped in the dark for the light switch. I heard it click as the light bulb buzzed to life noisily. As I spoke, I could feel my heart begin to accelerate. I could picture that basement now, that bare light bulb. My hands shook. Tim noticed this and began to caress my hands comfortingly. I continued. The basement wasn't that big or fancy. Nothing but bare concrete. We used it to store some old furniture and photo albums. Of course, we kept our laundry down there, too. I was a bit spooked by the door slamming, so I decided to get the chore over with fast. However, as my bare foot left the last step and touched the cold concrete floor, the light bulb glowed. It glowed so brightly that it burst. I screamed from fright, and I was just plunged into darkness again. It was so quiet that the distant sound of my parents or brother now extinguished. All I could hear was my own breathing. I paused again to catch my breath. It's been a long time since I told this story. All the memories that came with it filled me with terror. I moved in the direction of the laundry. I waved my hands in front of my face, but I couldn't see anything. I knew that there was a flashlight in the drawer of the desk next to the dryer. I took a few tentative steps, expecting any minute that I would feel bright pain as it exploded through my hip as I bumped into the desk. I never did, so I started taking bigger steps. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I realized that something was horribly wrong. I should have been on the other side of the room by now. A few steps after that, I should have been on the other side of the wall. Before I knew it, I was running. No, I was sprinting. I was hoping to be lucky enough to slam hard into the wall. It would prove my nightmare was a fake, but the wall never came. I ran through cold darkness. Then I heard a voice. Soft whisper. It was the voice of a man. There's nothing abnormal about his voice at all, but it gave me goosebumps. He warned me. He warned me never to return to the dark. He warned me to never tell anyone. My lips trembled, but I continued, my voice shaky. By then, I was beyond fear and incredulity. How could this be possible? Where was I? I yelped and shielded my eyes because it was suddenly blindingly bright, and I felt really cramped, like the room had just shrunk. Then strong hands were grabbing me and lifting me. I found myself being pulled from the wall. Tim's eyebrows shot up into his hairline at this point, but he remained quiet. We still have no idea how, but some men had heard a noise, and once they'd seen me, they rescued me immediately. They found me in a well that was hundreds of miles from my house, from that damn basement. I paused again, rubbing my temples with the tips of my fingers. I had to go to therapy, and no one could ever explain anything. Like I said before, I never mentioned what really happened to anyone. I didn't know whether I was more afraid of people thinking I was crazy, or if I was really more afraid of that voice. All I said was that I blacked out on my way downstairs. The therapist said I may have gone into a fugue state or something, which basically means that they don't have a goddamn clue what the hell happened to me. I continued to go to therapy for years and years, but it never helped. I felt I could never tell anyone the truth. Anyway, it all ended up in the papers, and my family and I had to move to a whole new town. After that, it was just kind of swept under the rug. People stopped asking questions. My parents never bring it up. They pretend it didn't happen. I like to do that too. So now that I've told you, I don't want to hear another word about it. If you tease me or prank me, so help me God, I'll dump your ass. I was trying to make a joke to help break the tension, but I could feel myself shaking more and more as I recounted the story. It had been some time since I'd thought about that traumatizing day. I felt tears from the corners of my eyes, but quickly blinked them away. Tim sat silently, his expression one of sympathy and concern. Wow, I had no idea. That sounds really horrifying. I completely understand your fear now. I'm feeling a bit less fond of the dark myself. He kissed me lightly on the forehead and rubbed my arm. I looked at him in disbelief. You don't think I'm crazy? You believe me? He smiled warmly. Of course I do. I can totally believe this universe is full of strange, unexplainable, sometimes horrifying things. He paused and looked me in the eye. But are you still okay for brunch with my folks? We can always reschedule, get McDonald's, watch some DuckTales or something. I smiled at him and chuckled. It's tempting, but no, we've booked a table and everything. Besides, it's too short notice now to cancel. Let's get going, okay? I I feel okay. It was a long time ago." Tim glanced at me in a way that showed he was wholly unconvinced, but he yielded. "All right, my dear. I'll just take the trash down quickly. Meet you downstairs." A few minutes later, I had my makeup on and was waiting downstairs on the ground floor. Tim had left ahead of me to take the trash to the refuse bin in the basement, and I'd expected him to be waiting for me already. But he wasn't there. I frowned, confused. Was he still downstairs? Why was he taking so long? I tried to keep my panic in check, but as the minutes ticked by, my heart began to thump loudly. No. There's no such thing as the dark place. There's no such thing as the monster in the basement. I stammered to myself softly as I tried to force the panic back down into the recesses of my stomach. He's I couldn't end that thought. What if by telling him the truth I put him in danger? The voice had said not to tell anyone. I thought that he would only be angry at me, but now I'm starting to think otherwise. My blood was electrified with terror as I took a small step towards the stairs. The stairway was curved so that the door was hidden. I cranked my neck and peered around the corner. The large metal basement door was shut. Tim, is everything okay?" My voice shook slightly as I spoke, but it was firm and loud. Silence pressed against my ears. I pulled my phone out of my bag. With the tap of a button, a small but bright flashlight switched on and illuminated the hallway. I turned the flashlight towards the stairs. With shaking hands, I took a step forward, started to descend. I halted after 3 steps. I felt dizzy now. Tim, this isn't funny. I'm really freaking..." Then I heard him. Kara, I tripped and hit my head." I heard him groan in pain. "I think I twisted my ankle. I really need some help." My fear instantly dissipated. Tim was hurt badly. His voice sounded really worried. If he'd been unconscious this whole time, he'd need serious medical attention. Shit, why had I waited so long to go check on him? Of course, there was no such thing as monsters. I hurried down the basement stairs and grabbed the door handle as I pulled it open. Complete, utter darkness pressed up against my eyes. I felt an unnatural coldness in the air. The basement door swung back and slammed into me so hard I felt myself fly through the air. I hit the ground hard and yelled with pain and surprise. The impact knocked my phone out of my hand, and I heard it smash off as the light went out. "What the hell?" I stammered, my head swimming with confusion. Timothy, I whispered into the pure darkness. I was sitting on the hard, damp floor, which was the only other thing I could sense, besides the horrendous cold, my soft sobs and the musty smell. Then a gloomy light bloomed to life. My jaw dropped open in horror. It couldn't be possible. There, many yards in front of me, too far to be possible, a single bare light bulb was hanging. Its light was cold and small. It looked almost exactly like the light in my old basement. As I looked down, I yelled and began to wail loudly. Lying in the pool of light beneath the bulb was the mutilated, bloodied corpse of my dear sweet Timothy, the man who I had loved more than anything, the man I'd wanted to marry, the man who always made me feel safe, the man who knew exactly how I liked my coffee and pancakes. His gray eyes were empty as he stared at me. Gone was the perennial warmth and love. His body was covered in deep scratches, and blood soaked his clothes. Oh my God, he was dead. He was dead. Guilt, terror, pain, all kinds of things washed over me. Tears poured down my face, and I yelled incomprehensibly, pleading for someone to help. Without warning, another identical light bulb appeared before the first. My whimpering paused. Then again, And again, my eyes widened with terror. Soon hundreds of lights were blooming into existence, like frigid miniature stars. The line of lights made a beeline towards me, with the final bulb flickering to life above my head. I heard the sizzle and hum of its electromagnetic field. I was frozen with terror. I had no idea what to do. My eyes burned with tears, and I squinted. Suddenly there was a loud pop. A bulb had exploded, and I shouted with fright. I gazed down the line of lights and gasped. At first all I saw were the shards of broken glass and the remnants of the broken bulb above. It had been the bulb right at the far end. My gaze shifted. A humanoid silhouette stood beneath the broken bulb. My heart stopped dead. No. I moaned softly, my brain unable to process the terror. Then the next bulb in the line burst, and the man instantaneously stood beneath it, one light closer to me. I screamed with fear and found myself clambering to my feet. I had to get out of here. As I struggled to stand in my panic, I heard another loud pop as the next bulb blew. Then the next one exploded. Suddenly all the bulbs were exploding, one after the other, louder and louder. I saw the silhouette get closer and closer, as swift as a shadow. "No, you stay the hell away from me," I screamed as bile forced its way into my mouth. My heart screamed from panic. As I turned, I heard a soft, raspy voice say, "We warned you." Tears flooding down my face, I groped wildly for the basement door. I could feel someone standing right behind me. I yelled in delighted surprise as my hands grasped the door handle. I heaved the door open and ran screaming up the stairs. As I got out of the building, I continued to run and scream as I welcomed the feel of warm, sticky summer air on my skin. I'd never been so happy to see the calm blue sky and the vicious midday sun. I ended up being taken to a hospital by a bunch of cops who'd seen me yelling and crying as I ran down the street. My face, my clothes were covered in dirt. My knees and elbows were scratched, but otherwise I was unharmed. I didn't dare tell them the truth. Instead, I said I'd had a panic attack, triggered by going down into the basement to find Timothy. The police searched the whole building, but the only thing they found in the basement that proved Timothy had been there at all was the trash bag he'd taken down. This time, the police have no leads. I miss Tim so much. I feel a numbness where he should be. I keep expecting him to just be around the next corner. His parents refuse to answer my calls. On the other hand, my parents won't stop calling. Suffice to say, I can't even think about the dark without bursting into tears. Even if there's no hope for psychological recovery, I don't think it matters. I still feel like someone's standing behind me constantly. The feeling is especially strong when my back faces a lightless room. I'm never alone now. They're always watching me, waiting for me to return to the dark. I've kept all the lights on constantly. I've not left my apartment in days. No matter how long I wait, though, I can feel them. I'm not even surprised. After all, I had not heeded the darkness's warnings. I get the feeling those who trespass are never forgotten, and certainly never forgiven. The small town of Ravenwood was plagued by a terrifying creature, known as the Dogman. It was said to be a creature that was half man, half dog, with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp teeth. It was a creature of legend, but the people of Ravenwood knew it was all too real. It had been attacking and killing their livestock for months, and the town was in a state of crippling fear. The citizens couldn't go one night without hearing the next dawn of one of their own picked away in the night. Who among them, they always wondered, could stand against such a terrifying scourge. The beast, this dog man, he'd proven to be too much for even the police to handle. That is until one man decided to stand up from the crowd. Jack, a young man known for his bravery and hunting skills, decided that he was going to put an end to this, but he couldn't go alone. He gathered a team of the best hunters he could find in town, far and wide, and they set out into the woods to hunt the dog man. As they entered the wood, the atmosphere was eerie, and the air was thick with tension. On all sides, the trees around them were thick, close together, boxing them in. Looking around, each and every one of them knew that they were not going to get out of this forest. There was no turning back. Only they or the dog man would leave alive. They knew they were facing an extremely dangerous creature, and they were aware that this may be their very last hunt. They set up camp and began to track the dogmen. They searched for days, but it was as if the creature had vanished into thin air. One night, as they sat around the campfire, discussing their next move, they heard a blood-curdling howl in the forest. They knew they had found their target, but where? That sent a chill down their spine. They quickly packed up the camp and set out to track the howl. As they followed the howl deeper into the woods, the trees grew thicker and the darkness more intense, but they knew they were getting close. Suddenly they came across a clearing, and in the center of the clearing stood the beast. It was even more terrifying than the legends had described. It stood on its hind legs, towering over the hunters, and its glowing red eyes locked onto its prey. Each of the men stood, despite each of them being hardened men who had seen the likes of the vile and rabid game. They had never before seen something so terrifying, so gargantuan, so tyrannical as the dog man that stood before them now. They could feel, each of them, this thing's burning red eyes peering straight through their corneas, straight through their brains, into their hearts. "That's it," said Jack, his heart pounding in his chest. "That's the dog man." The hunters raised their weapons and prepared to fire, but the dog man was too fast. With lightning speed it charged at them, its razor-sharp teeth bared, ready to rend flesh from bone. The hunters fired, but their bullets seemed to have no effect on the creature. "We have to take it down," Jack shouted. The hunters fought bravely, but they were no match for the dog man. It was far too strong, far too fast, and just far too ferocious. Jack was thrown to the ground, and he thought that it was the end of him. He watched as two of his other companions were slammed into a tree, instantly crushing their skulls to paste. The third, Jack watched in horror as the dog man lifted the poor bastard by the head and ripped it clean from its shoulders, dousing them both in warm metallic crimson. Jack had all but given up hope. There was nothing he could do. The men were dead, and the dogmen would have him next. The dogman approached, the ground shaking with fear of every step. Snarling, he opened his mouth. Suddenly, Jack remembered something his grandfather had told him. He remembered the legend of the dogman and how it may be defeated, for, like many creatures of native lore, they all bore a very distinct weakness to silver. With a surge of strength, Jack rose to his feet and pulled out his silver knife. The dogman turned to face him, snarling defiantly, and Jack plunged the blade into his heart with a furious roar. The creature let out a blood-curdling howl and fell to the ground, dead. Jack stood, adrenaline forcing his heart to thump and pound in his chest, harder than it had ever before. "We did it," Jack said, his voice shaking with emotion. "The town is saved." He returned to Ravenwood as a hero. He was greeted with cheers and congratulations from the townspeople. Jack went to see the mayor to report what had happened. "Jack! Oh God, Jack, I can't thank you enough," the mayor said, a look of relief plastered on his face. "The dog man had been terrorizing our town for so long. You've saved us all." "It was my pleasure, sir," Jack replied, "but I couldn't have done it without the help of my men. God rest their souls." The mayor nodded. "You're right. This is a team effort. They were brave men who gave their lives, and I want to make sure that everyone is recognized for their bravery. I'll be holding a town meeting tomorrow to present medals of honor to you and holding a memorial for the rest of your team." Jack couldn't believe it. He had never thought of himself as a hero, but to the town, he now was. He felt a sense of pride and accomplishment wash over him. But their victory was short-lived. They soon realized that the Dogman was not the only creature terrorizing the town. The legend of the werewolf was also true, and it had been seen recently in the forest. Jack knew that he would have to act fast before it did any real harm to the town. He set out again into the forest to hunt the werewolf. This time he was better prepared, and he had silver bullets on hand for when he inevitably came face to face with the beast. He searched for days, but the werewolf was elusive. The werewolf was far more agile than the Dogman before him. One night, as he sat around the campfire, pondering his next move, when a blood-curdling howl echoed through the woods, just as the Dogman's had. It was even more terrifying than anything he'd ever heard. It was a howl that even would have given the Dogman pause. And before he knew what was happening, its eyes, its burning yellow eyes, were fixed upon his. The young hunter, the hero, raised his weapon and fired. But the werewolf was far too fast, bounding from treetop to treetop. From one, it bounded like a panther towards the other, with its teeth and claws bared. He fired his silver bullets. After a few, perhaps 3 or 4 misfires, his aim came true, and the werewolf let out a final howl before crashing to the ground dead. Jack felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had finally put an end to another terror that had plagued the town. He looked at it and looked back towards the town, imagining the same relief in the eyes of the townspeople. He had done it once again. And as he made his way back to town, he was again greeted as a hero. The town threw a huge celebration in his honor, and once more the mayor presented him with a medal. Jack felt a sense of pride and accomplishment, but as he looked back towards the townspeople, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness. He knew that this wasn't the end. There would be other monsters out there, lurking, and other battles that he would have to fight. But for now, he was content to bask in the glory of his victory. As the days went by, Jack became known as the Monster Hunter of Ravenswood. He was called upon whenever there was any kind of creature, any kind of behemoth monstrosity terrorizing the town, and he always answered the call, ready to face whatever gargantuan plagued the city. In the years to follow, Jack faced many challenges, but he would always emerge the victor. He became a legend in his own right, and his name was passed down through many glorious generations of the town. But for Jack, it was never about the glory or the fame. It was about protecting the innocent and keeping his community safe. And that was a duty he would always be willing to undertake, no matter the cost. And so, Jack continued to hunt monsters, his courage and determination never faltering, always ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead. Ever since I was little, death was a next-door neighbor. I mean, literally right next door. I could look out the window and see it. I could watch through my bedroom window as Mom walked towards it. Every day, she would wake up before the sun and make her brisk walk to work. It took me a long time to discover what she did, and even longer to understand it. She would pry bodies apart and put them back together, prettier than they were when they arrived. They arrived in dark vans, bruises all over their bodies, and they would leave with eyeliner and makeup. That's where I learned that one can measure life in shades of purple, whether it be bruises or makeup. Measured, mind you, not defined. So naturally, that's where I saw my first body. I'd try to sneak in now and then, and I guess I was never successful. Mom always thwarted me, but eventually, I just wore her down. It was too much being the mortician and the security guard. So there he was, a fairly innocent death. He looked so natural, but just a little less. I always thought I would take after Mom, and for a while I was on track to. I'm not even sure how I got sidetracked. I enjoyed making Mom's job look nice. She always kept it so dour, and I had wanted to spruce up the place. I felt fulfilled when it all came together, and I felt like I normally do, just a little more. I did it for my house, then I did it for my mom, my friends, my neighbors, and before I even knew what was happening, I was trying to convince people to buy a house. My houses sold, and people took notice of how I put them together. I guess, if I were to be poetic, that's how I took after Mom. I took these houses, the remains of them, and dolled them up as best I knew how. I made it look nice. So nice that you'd never know it was dead at all. For a long time, I thought that when people died, that was it. No ghosts, no heaven or hell. It was a snap, and you were just gone. Like a house. When the furnace goes out, when the walls rot away, and the spider webs consume every window, I thought the house was gone. I know now that's wrong. Despite working with my mom for many years, I never entertained the notion of ghosts. It wasn't until the house on Wilbur Street that I changed my mind. I won't go into too much detail, but that house was its own beast. And if it weren't for a strange but generous buyer, it might have been the end of my career. It was a weed, though. Something that sprouted in me, unwelcome but beautiful nonetheless. A world you might not have ever heard of. A world that probably, if not for what I'm telling you now, you would likely go your whole life without knowing about. In the housing market, there exists a small but dedicated sect reserved for the enigmatic influential, or even the nefarious. I'm talking about the buying and selling of houses that have, in one way or another, been deemed haunted. Just like any realtor, I'll get my hands on a house sometimes. Sometimes I find it myself, sometimes it's offloaded by a larger realty company. Regardless, I'll go in, make the house look as nice as possible, just like I would with any other house. That was before I discovered this unofficial and morbid market. Unlike an unafflicted house, however, I would research and experiment. With enough research, I can gather information on who perished within the house and the cause of death. I also need to be mindful of people who lived in the home, but had relocated, as spirits can travel back to where their emotions were the strongest, like a magnet pulling in metal sand. After gathering the information, I conduct my small experiments. The severity and nature of the haunting need to be distinguished and defined before I can even list the house. Something you might not know about most hauntings is how consistent they are. Sure, the activity will alter, but it will happen over and over. I've had houses you could set a stopwatch by. I use a marker to outline cups and dishes in order to check if they've been pushed. I take pictures of each room every hour, on the hour, so I can meticulously comb through them. Something you may or may not know about typical hauntings is they can be boring. Rarely do you come across an outwardly aggressive home. And when you do, the type of people that buy those, it's not my place, but it's troubling to think about what they might want the home for. That's neither here nor there, though. Haunted homes sell to many people. You have eccentrics and ghost hunters who want a place for entertainment. There are people who practice the dark arts, though you can typically sniff out the wannabe types. There are even people who just really need a home and try to get a cheaper deal. Depending on the haunting and its interest, sometimes they do. You have to call it a loss at some point and lower the price just below market value. That's how you do it. That's what this house was, I thought. Another suburban home I was going to take a hit on. Boy, was I wrong. Of course, that's how tales like these come to be. If I was right, if all I ever saw was a coffee mug move across the counter, then you'd never hear a peep out of me. The house was on Carter Avenue. If you don't know which Carter Avenue out of the hundreds that likely exist, then yes, you're not meant to. I got it for a bargain from my peer because, well, it was a house that nobody had high expectations for. There wasn't a history of violence or any mention of the occult, just a younger couple that passed away in their sleep. carbon monoxide leak. To me, though, the house was lovely, if not for a small string of reported activity. The house could have been sold on its merits. It was in a quiet neighborhood. Everything looked new and had been taken care of. It was a picture of suburban living. So I hedged my bets and thought I would just make the house look like a proper home for anyone looking to buy. It took a while, an uncomfortable amount of time, before I'd got a bite. While I toiled away looking through photos of the house's bedroom, my phone buzzed. It was a buyer. A young couple looking to buy their first home. The woman on the phone beamed about starting a family of their own. So we set up a date to meet, and I plunged further into Carter Avenue. As bizarre as it is to say, I wanted to make sure the haunting was child-friendly. No loud noises or aggressive movements, you understand. For the most part, though, the house was quiet. Sure, there were signs, but the haunting was so mellow, you'd never know it if you weren't looking for it. A slight push that would move a cup from its outline. Pictures on the wall that would go askew, and a penny was even pushed off the counter. That was all, so, just enough. It was just enough activity for it to make the difference between haunted and natural occurrence. Maybe I should have had my wits about me in that regard. Though I know, when I offer myself grace, there's no way I could have known it was anything other than a run-of-the-mill haunting. The day of the showing plays in my head from time to time. I always go back to when I was starting down the hall. It was right before the couple was supposed to show up. I stopped at the top of the stairs and looked down the hallway. It led to all the bedrooms and had light bleeding in from each. The sun was gentle and warm. It created a vignette in the hall. At the end of the hall there was a picture hanging above a small table, decorated with various books and a small fern. The picture was an oil painting, a stark mixture of black and white. Upon seeing it initially, you'd assume it was nonsense, a Rorschach test of sorts. If you took the time to soak it in, though, at least for me, I made out the picture. It almost always looked like an animal, with a wide-open jaw, a howl of anguish. Once I made out the mouth, the rest followed suit. Maybe the face was meant to be beautiful, but it looked straight out of hell to me. It felt crooked. It, however, was a painting in the home that the haunting hadn't affected. To the naked eye, the painting was perfectly straight, lined right up to the surface of the table under it, but it felt crooked. I could feel the painting making one side of my head heavier, craning my neck as if trying to see it from a new angle. The hall itself felt as though it was stretching out, pulling the details of the painting further and further away from me. The once warm vignette ignited from the room, turning into static with the tunnel. So it shouldn't come as a shock when I say I nearly jumped out of my skin when I heard the front door shut. My arms rushed to my chest as if guarding me from an incoming attack. Even without my hands actually on my skin, I could feel my heart smacking around inside. A few breaths in and out calmed me, and I gathered my senses. I quickly rushed down the stairs and spotted the couple, Sandra and Owen Welling. The door had startled me, but I'd informed them upon their arrival that they could just come in, as the house wasn't exactly booked for tours. Bounding down the stairs, I immediately started in with the pleasantries. They looked as normal as can be. The woman was a blonde, her hair just barely touching her shoulders. The man looked tired, almost like he had headed straight to the home from work. His brown hair haphazardly swooped to one side. I couldn't help but notice he was sheepish, letting the woman take the lead and speaking up very little. Admittedly, this annoyed me. They were a couple, and while every dynamic is different, I found it odd that he had so little interest in where he might build a family. It happened, though, and swung both ways. Suppose it's nothing more than a pet peeve, but it did inform me to pay more attention to the wife. So, with her trailing closely behind me, we toured the lower floor. It felt almost like it used to, showing off regular homes. The activity in the house was so sparse that I'd rarely stop to talk about it. In the kitchen, I informed them that it's best to leave cups and dishes a respectful distance from the edge. In the dining room, I informed them that sometimes they could hear a knocking on the floor above. The knocking noise was not audible from anywhere else in the house, which is probably the most peculiar haunt in the home, but it's harmless. She asked questions here and there, but it wasn't until we began to ascend the stairs that she started delving deeper. In the first bedroom, she asked me who the previous occupants had been. I told her it was a young couple, though I only knew their names. We sometimes find photos left behind by the previous occupants, but this time, especially with younger folks, the families affected will snatch up photos before I even get my hands on the house. It might seem odd that I don't go too deep into the lives of those who are supposedly haunting the grounds. I did early on. I'd familiarize myself with their faces and history, but I found that doing so would cause a confirmation bias. I would see faces where there might not have been one, or I'd pick up smells related to the previous death and assume it was paranormal, when it could just be a clogged drain. The woman stalled for a moment and rested her hand on the doorframe. I could only see her back. The sun beaming through the windows wrapped a glow around her thin figure. "It's cold." I hardly heard the words when she spoke them. They were distant, like they were afraid to leave the room. She was right, though. It was cold, and noticeably so. The house was monitored for temperature variations, but nothing so severe. The skin on my arms prickled. I thought the cold would have made me shiver, but after taking in the new chill, I realized my pocket was buzzing. I ignored it, realizing the man had drifted out of sight, though only barely. He stood in the hall, looking at the same painting that had mesmerized me earlier. "This would make a great nursery," the woman said, her voice louder this time, but still distant. I was watching the man, though, his arms sheepishly jostling from side to side like he was fidgeting with something. A tension had built in my chest, partially from the cold gripping my lungs. Reaching into my pocket, I quickly retrieved the phone, intending to ignore the call as the vibrating was audible. "Oh, absolutely. It's great for sunlight in the mornings," I replied, glancing at her as I spoke. I glimpsed the same silhouette before returning to my phone's touchscreen, and just like the painting had before, the illuminated screen stole my attention. I couldn't have been more than a minute, though. Despite how long it felt, the clock in the upper right corner didn't change. An incoming call. The sensation of the phone rattling in my hand acted as a warning bell, a siren of things to come. Incoming call from Sandra Wellings. The words couldn't have felt heavier in my hands. Her voice, when I picked up the phone, couldn't have been louder in my head. I listened to the woman on the other line apologizing. She was embarrassed. They had fallen asleep on the couch and had no alarm set. She was asking me if they could still come by or if I wanted to reschedule. A reply, no matter how desperate I was for it, did not come, and as Sandra continued bidding for my attention, I could only look down the stretching hallway. In the deserted hallway, the only object present was the small white plastic dish and 2 batteries lying nearby. Suddenly, I became horrendously aware of the figure that was in the doorway. I couldn't see her as I started down the hall, but God, could I feel her. Her presence felt so stifling, I thought I might fall through the floor. A soft whimper of denial weaseled its way up my throat. It felt like I was being told a story, or rather, it felt like a story I'd already known, but that had been pushed deep down. This was someone else's story, a story of a death much more sinister than the public knew. This would be a great room for a nursery, the figure spoke, and as if those words manifested, I could feel strands of hair drop on the side of my face. She must have been as tall as she felt, hunched over with her head pressed against the ceiling, dark strands hanging like stalagmites. She wanted me to look. I could feel it. her gaze fixed on me and burned holes through my scalp. Closer and closer, I could feel her warm breath wafting on the side of my face. The smell was more noticeable, though, or rather the lack thereof. I could only watch the painting, the hallway, once again tunneling as I pondered if it was safer to look at her or ignore her. Hauntings could get bad. Yes, even this bad. I've experienced little myself, but this wasn't my first time, though my heart still bumped like it was. When the retching began, the decision to focus on the hallway became one that I picked. A guttural and whining scrap lurched from the woman, though. It sounded like pulling marbles down from metal tubing, and after a moment, something spilled from her mouth. I could hear small thuds smacking the ground, one after another. Once again, the sound reminded me of marbles. Then she was gone. I released the breath that had been held down as her weight lifted off me, allowing my skin to loosen. Looking down, they were all splayed out at my feet. They must have rolled around quite a bit after hitting the floor. A portrait drawn with AA batteries. A tale of heartbreak, scored by the chiding of a baby. A soft whine, much softer than the woman's. That room really does get so much sun. It had rested such a lovely glow on the crib inside. I could hear the baby crying from within it. I'm sure I could have heard it from anywhere in the house. It was ethereal, something I couldn't escape. It echoed through the walls and bounced around the room as I took my first step inside. The batteries around my feet shuffled aside and rolled, clattering against one another. A game of electric billiards. The sound of the baby crying became less defined with each step I took, its cries being pulled further through the veil. The white wooden slats of the crib ceased to be an obstacle, and I could peek over the edge. I didn't intend to step further. The bile was already churning. The sides of the crib acted like a dam for the wet, sticky mess inside. All that white was painted freshly red, a crimson that glistened in the sun. My legs gave out, and I crashed to the floor. The hardwood vibrated on impact. I felt my throat choke and scratch. Burning came afterwards in intervals. I was getting air, never catching my breath. A burning rose in my chest, nails dragging. Looking down at my shirt, I could see long dark lines running along my skin, like aged scratch marks. "I'm sorry," I whispered, cowardly, pensive. Looking up, he was lying on the floor, the boyfriend, the man. He was clawing at his chest, and his body writhed. The veins in his eyes crept towards the pupils like vines. His eyes rolled up, his gaze reached far above his head. This mess of a man, he was watching her, so scared of her now. She was looming over me again. All her hate and grief sat like a ball in my neck. All her unbridled horror wrapped around me, and I felt it. I could feel the hot, stinging tears running down my cheek. All that horror, waking up in the middle of the night, feeling how weak your body is. She must have known, or maybe she saw him taking them out. He probably told her he was replacing them. A depth of despair I could only understand when I looked into her eyes. Dying, knowing the life inside of you would follow. I thought, truly, that her face would be horrific. A mangled mess of bones and flesh, red and pulse. Horrific indeed. But there was no blood, just tears. The streams disobeying gravity. They twisted around her face and slipped around the curves of her nose. Her very own soul, a Rorschach. Pain will paint our lives. It can shape the way we see things. It can change the feeling of a room. It can haunt the memories you once held dear. No matter how many times you try to paint over that pain, it's still there. And I felt it on my face that day, as a few of her tears relented, failing to mix with mine. I knew her more intimately than I knew myself. That's the real ghost, and I suppose it always will be. The pain. We locked eyes, and although I understood her, the fear did not subside. A part of me felt like if I moved, she would change. If I broke off the conversation, as it were, then I would see something worse. The pain was a mask, and I could feel whatever was under it was in torment. I still think about it sometimes. The man was there in all his horror, face beet red and swollen, his throat ravaged with claw marks as he gasped for air, feeling as though he was being suffocated, regretting the decision he had made, probably telling himself in his final moments that he could have just left, and he was right. Of course, he likely died thinking of himself, and that was a moment of solace for me, that in his last thoughts he realized just how stupid he was. Even as I heard his body writhe around, pudders of liquid spilling from his mouth, even as he smacked the floor with what little strength he had left, begging for mercy, I watched his face, long and black, curtain-like strands of hair cutting off my peripherals, so all I could see was her. I stared into her face, dread growing closer. My eyes started to lose focus as she looked down at me. Her face appeared to stretch away from me like it was retreating down a hallway. She moved further and further, the guttural sound from before echoing around the column of hair she created. It got louder, growing as she shrank. Before too long, her face appeared like a two-dimensional object in the distance, just her misery, hanging solitary in a museum. At that distance, the noise was suffocating. A chirp layered on top of 1,000 other chirps, until I couldn't stand it anymore, and my eyelids slammed shut. The noise halted then, and quiet returned. My breathing was deep and ragged, and after wrestling with the thought, I opened my eyes again. Staring down the hallway, I felt the phone in my pocket buzz. Reaching into it, I read that Sandra was trying to get a hold of me again. Only 3 minutes had passed since she called. Accepting the call, I heard her rambling. I only focused on what she was saying when she asked if I was showing other people around. The words came out before I thought about how to phrase them. I just asked, "Did you hear her too?" Sandra chimed that she had, but hung up when the baby started crying, as it was hurting her ears. She continued talking as I zoned out, hypnotized by the hallway once again. "The house isn't a fit for you," I cut her off, cold and direct. "This house, it was no place to raise a baby. Someone will buy it, but I won't sell it. A damn shame, too. The light coming in through the window at the end of the hall really livens up the place." The emergency alert on my phone went off with a shrill noise, repeating 3 times and vibrating angrily, just as I was bringing the last of my stuff into the cabin. I took the device out of my pocket and stared at it in disbelief for about a minute before realizing that I'd have to leave, only moments after arriving. My hands were shaking from the cold as I read through it again. Severe weather alert. Heavy snowfall in the Frontenac region is expected to begin tomorrow. 60 to 80 centimeters of precipitation. Not good. I realized the roads would be impassable by this time, the following day. That meant I would have to leave early the next morning to avoid being stuck on the road in the blizzard. but subsequently meant 0 ice fishing time for me. I'd be lucky to make it home before it started coming down in earnest. Moments later, messages started coming in from my 3 friends who had planned to join me. The group chat notification popped up on my phone as I opened it. Matt, did you see the emergency alert about the storm? I guess the trip's off. What a bunch of crap. Ted, OMFG, a generational storm is what they're calling it now. Looks like we'll have to postpone it a few weeks. I hope you didn't go through with your plan to go up a day early, Jay. Greg, no kidding. What are the chances this blizzard hits on our ice fishing weekend? I messaged back saying I understood we'd have to reschedule. I told them that I made the trip up alone, accompanying the message with forehead slapping emojis. It sucks that I'll be stuck up here alone, I thought to myself. My dog Gibson pawed at my leg and I smiled at her, feeling slightly reassured by her presence. Yeah, you're right, Gibby. I'm not completely alone. At least I've got you here with me. After putting down a bowl of water and another containing kibble, my next priority was to start a fire in the small brick stove at the center of the main living area. There was wood stacked up in a neat pile next to it, and a small bag containing kindling which we'd brought with us in the summer and left behind. At first glance, it looked like a large enough stack, but I knew from experience I'd need twice as much as it appeared to make to get through the night, so I went outside to gather more from beneath the boathouse. The family cottage was a rustic one, to put it mildly. There's no running water, no electricity, and the cabin's poorly insulated. Perennially procrastinated repairs were needed in more than one place, including the floor beneath one bed which had partially collapsed, letting in slight trickles of cold air from outside. It was drafty, and I could hear the sound of mice which had made their way through the gaps, burrowing in the bedroom and finding their way into our old coats or sleeping bags or something that we'd left behind. I sighed as I lit the kerosene lamps which were scattered on wobbly tables around the main living area. There was something about having vermin in the cottage that set me on edge, but at least Gibson's presence would keep them at a distance. After filling the place with warm, flickering light from a half-dozen kerosene lamps, I felt a little better. There was reassurance in having fire, and I started working on making a big one in the stove that would keep me warm throughout the night. I loosely wadded up some newspaper and then stacked dry kindling on top, making a teepee. Over that, I added larger pieces of wood, until I had piled it to the ceiling of the small stove. Then I lit a strip of cardboard and held it up to the paper inside, catching it alight in several places, watching as it began to burn and then flared up in a bright white-orange glow. Holding my hands up to the fire, I watched it and warmed myself up. Eventually I took off my boots and my coat, the entire cottage getting a little toasty. There's no sense unpacking, I thought, taking a beer out of the cooler and opening it. I took a sip and couldn't help but grimace at the taste. I'd never tried the brand before, and I picked it up on recommendation. It was awful, and lukewarm to boot. Par for the course, considering the trip so far. Took out my phone and watched some Netflix while beer went flat beside me. I lifted Gibson up onto the futon with me so that she was off the floor and close to the fire where it was warm. Eventually I got bored of Office reruns and called it a night, adding another log to the fire and reminding myself to wake up in an hour to keep it going. Pulling the futon even closer to the stove so that it was close to the fire as safety would allow, I curled up in my sleeping bag and drifted off into an uncomfortable slumber, constantly tossing and turning, trying to stay warm but not really succeeding. I woke up to the sound of whining coming from Gibson's trembling form on the bed beside me. I was so cold that I was actually scared. My teeth were chattering uncontrollably, and I realized a few hours had passed. The fire had gone out completely, reduced to mere embers at the base of the stove. I put on my jacket and blew hot breath onto my fingers, pulling Gibson closer to me. She was shaking as well. My hands were trembling as I put more newspaper and kindling on the fire, blowing it into embers and hoping they would reignite. My lungs felt frozen, and my heart was beating fast, my skin prickling with pins and needles, turning it into a total numbness in my extremities. I'd never felt so cold in my life. I realized I was far beyond the weather forecast for tomorrow. It seemed like it was minus 30 degrees. and steadily dropping further. Terrified that I wouldn't be able to get my body temperature back up, my mind started racing, thinking of worst-case scenarios. If I couldn't stop shaking pretty soon, it would be impossible to start the fire again. I recalled that my truck was just outside, and I could get in there and start it up, turning on the heat until I felt warm again. The idea of getting out there and the truck refusing to start was too much to take, though. Considering the state of the beat-up old Ford, that seemed like a distinct possibility. So I continued stoking the fire, blowing on the precious few embers and adding more newspaper every so often until the tiny flame had begun to grow. I held my shaking hands up to the measly fire and added pieces of kindling sparingly, one by one, terrified of it going out again. Pulling Gibson closer, we shared each other's warmth, and I began to feel halfway human again. A sound came from outside the cabin suddenly, startling me and causing me to jump. My heart skipped a beat, then pounded faster and faster in my chest. A noise like fingernails being dragged along the siding could be heard from all around. Echoing in the small space, something was going from one end of the cottage to the other, attempting to get inside. Deep, guttural breathing could be heard, grunting and snorting, desperate as it scraped its talons along the boarded-up windows. Gibson began to whine, making high-pitched noises as she huddled closer to me, and I put my hands over her muzzle, muffling her sound. Was it a bear, I wondered? I realized I was holding my breath. I thought about the holes in the flimsy facade of the cabin, the spot beneath the bed where mice were getting in. I thought about the broken screen door and the wooden one behind that which needed to be replaced, almost falling off its rusty hinges. The entire cottage felt so frail and insecure all of a sudden, and I heard the loud noise of whatever that thing was, breathing heavily just outside, trying to get in. Maybe it was too cold out there even for it. The ground shook from the weight of the creature as it made its way around the cabin. I was so focused on it that I didn't notice the fire going out at first as it fizzled down to embers. I continued holding my breath until it was gone. Then I relit the fire, my shaking hands barely able to get it going again. Once it was burning hot, I didn't sleep anymore. I pulled Gibson close, and the two of us stayed up all night, watching the fire with wary eyes, taking occasional glances at the door. Even once we were both warm, we continued to shiver. When the sun came up, I didn't notice at first. It was dark in the cottage one minute, and then it was light. I blinked my eyes a few times and rolled out of bed, deciding I would waste no more time leaving. I was hoping the bear, or whatever had been outside the night before, was gone. Gibson was scratching at the front door, asking to be let outside to pee, which told me it was probably safe. In the light of the morning, all that had happened seemed to be a bad nightmare, and I told myself maybe it had been, till I got outside and saw the claw marks that marked the exterior wall. Shuddering, I threw my belongings in the truck, doused the fire with too much water, and took one last look at the place. What a weekend this had turned out to be, I thought to myself. With more people around, it would be easier to keep the fire going, taking turns feeding it with wood so that everyone could sleep through the night. But it was frightening being up here by myself, even with Gibson by my side. I'd never done it before in the winter, and I never would again. There were too many things that could go wrong. Freak snowstorm, a fallen tree blocking the road, getting stuck or going into a ditch, and those were just the beginning. I wanted to get out of here before any of those things happened. The truck didn't want to start at first. I turned the key in the ignition twice, hearing only the click of the absence of any engine noise. Cursing loudly, I checked to make sure I hadn't left the interior lights on or something which would drain the battery. Satisfied there was still a charge, I tried one more time, and finally the old shitbox let out a cough and kicked into life. The engine began to sputter before finally settling into a steady, rusted purr. "All right, Gibson, let's get out of here," I said, rubbing my dog's head and smiling as she blinked at me. She looked content in the front seat, happy to be back in the truck and out of the cold cottage. There was a thin layer of snow on the gravel road, and the tires moved easily enough. I looked up to see the sky was turning gray above us. A few snowflakes were just beginning to fall. The weather was making an early appearance. I turned on the radio, and sure enough, they said the same thing I was thinking. The storm would be arriving early. By noon, the highways would be a parking lot. Whiteout conditions. Be prepared to be trapped in your car. Have emergency services ready. My anxiety was through the roof as I went around a bend in the road. Hitting the gas, I came to the first big hill and went over it, seeing something strange up ahead as I came over the rise. Whatever it was blocking the road. Massive. Brown. The lumpy fur shape got bigger as I pulled up in front of it. The bear, which had been trying to get into my cottage the night before, was dead, lying in the middle of the gravel road and blocking it completely. First, I thought it had frozen to death. I got out of my truck and inspected it and was surprised to find there was a horrible smell coming from the carcass. It was a chemical smell, noxious and unpleasant, like some sort of factory waste. The snow had melted all around the beast, the blood and entrails pooling around the far side. What the hell could have done something like this? Aren't bears at the top of the food chain? Alpha predators? Gibson was by my side, but she didn't venture anywhere near the body. Usually she would have gotten curious, trying to sniff at it or something like that, but she stayed next to me, emitting a low growl. The road was completely blocked, I realized. There was no way out, not unless I could move it. No matter which way I attempted it, the giant body of the dead bear would not budge. It weighed a ton. There were large trees on either side of the road, so close to the driving path. There was only one way out, which was by driving across the frozen lake. And that was way risky. I hadn't been able to test the thickness of the ice yet. It would need to be nearly a foot deep for me to feel comfortable, but there was a clear way on and off the ice if it came down to it. I got back in the truck and threw it in reverse since there was nowhere to turn around. I felt sick to my stomach, nervous with anticipation and fear, uncertain of how things were going to play out. Once back in front of the cottage, I got out of the truck and went down to the ice with my spud. Walking out onto the lake, I cleared a spot with my boot and began to dig. I dug with the sharpened metal rod. Satisfied that I'd found the bottom of the ice, I put the tape measure through the hole, hoping it would be close to a foot. Looking at the tape measure, my heart sank. The ice was barely 7 inches thick, just below the minimum 8 inches where it would be safe to drive a vehicle across. My truck was on the heavy side, and I wouldn't feel comfortable unless it was a full foot thick. I pulled out my phone and checked for a signal, deciding it was time to call someone for help. Who would I call? I wasn't sure, but I knew I couldn't get out of this jam by myself. Of course, I muttered out loud, seeing the signal bars were down to 0, and the words "no service" were printed over the top of the screen. Surely I would have gotten another severe warning alert otherwise, because snow was now being dumped down on me from above, and the sky had turned nearly black with the approaching storm. I typed out a message in the group chat, telling them my situation, hitting send regardless of the lack of signal. I knew from experience that it would go through eventually. I just hoped it would be sooner rather than later. Gibson let out a loud, high-pitched whine, her tone rising in volume as she began to bark. High, persistent yips that were totally unlike her. She backed away, then let out a stream of urine, her hind legs trembling as she did. I looked up from my phone and saw what she had spotted. Across the lake, something was moving in the trees. I saw fingers wrapping around a tree trunk, too high up, the nails too long and too sharp to be a person. Whatever this giant was, it looked similar to a man, but it was massive. It peered out at me from beneath the boughs of the trees, its head probably 15 feet off the ground. Its skeletal limbs matched the monochromatic tone of the birches on either side of it, a gray, pale white shade. I couldn't distinguish the entire form of it in the shadows, but I could make out its eyes. They reflected back at me, catching the gray light coming through the clouds. And then I saw its mouth spread wider in a grin, teeth dripping blood, and it disappeared back into the darkness. The temperature felt like it had dropped to 30 below again, and I began to shiver involuntarily as I looked down to see Gibson doing the same. There was only one choice, only one place we could go. Back to the cabin. It was either that or risk plunging the truck into the frozen lake, attempting to drive across. We were on a small peninsula surrounded by water on all sides. Only one way in and one way out, and that way was blocked by the body of a giant brown bear. I took the dog back inside the cottage and locked the doors, taking uneasy glances outside through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. What the hell was that thing in the forest, I asked myself over and over again, but no answers came to mind. There were no creatures I could think of that were 15 feet tall, with reflective eyes that stood on two legs like a man, capable of disemboweling a full-grown brown bear, capable of causing the temperature to plunge all around me. There was only one creature capable of that, and it wasn't supposed to exist. It was something from myth, from folklore, from legends that weren't supposed to be real. "It's a Wendigo," I said out loud, immediately regretting the words, as if saying them made them true, as if saying them would summon it. Wendigos are supernatural creatures born of Canadian First Nation folklore. They live in cold, remote places and make people go mad merely through their presence. They thrive on hunger, despair, and loneliness of their victims, who usually live in remote communities. They drive families apart, instilling urges of cannibalism in people and making them want to consume their loved ones. During the lean, hard months of the winter, this usually happens. They turn people into raving cannibals, driving away all their loved ones, and then once they're alone, the Wendigo strikes. It either consumes you while you're still alive, tearing flesh from your bones while you beg and scream, or it turns you into one of its own kind. But the Wendigo's greatest curse is that no matter how much flesh it consumes, it only grows hungrier. With every ounce of meat it takes in, it grows taller and more emaciated. Its hunger grows more insatiable with its height, until it's a towering beast with its head amongst the treetops as it roams the forest, constantly searching for its next meal. Gibson whimpered and burrowed her face into my armpit as if hearing my inner thoughts. Trying to reassure her, I stroked her fur and told her it'd be okay, although I had a feeling it wouldn't. I tried to get the fire going again, but it was a fruitless effort. Everything inside the stove was damp and wet, and scolded myself for dousing the fire with so much water. Still, I kept at it, knowing we might be stuck here for a while. Pretty soon the wind was howling and blowing outside, and the snow was piling up in front of the door. I made a point of opening it every so often to clear the snow from the steps, knowing that I would need firewood, taking weary glances off into the forest across the lake as I did so. Finally, I got the fire started, a low guttering flame in the stove, which wanted to go out all the time. Everything was damp, but I kept feeding it fresh kindling, nursing it, until it was able to keep going by itself. Hours passed as we waited to either run out of firewood or be attacked by the creature. We were running low on kindling and the sun was beginning to set. My stomach rumbled with hunger when I felt something strange. The ground suddenly shook beneath my feet, and I heard Gibson whining from beside me. "What is it, girl?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat as I realized the answer. It was the creature. It was back. The dining room table began to rattle and bounce up and down as whatever was outside got closer, and I imagined the creature lifting the roof off a cabin like a top on a dish in a fancy restaurant, picking me up and eating me whole like a wriggling shrimp. A second later, there was a sound at the front door, metal being ripped and sheared as I realized the creature was making its way in. The screen door landed on the ground with a crash, and then the wooden door was being torn from its hinges an instant later. Cold air rushed inside as Gibson began to let out shrill, panicked barks of terror. I heard the thing tearing apart the front entrance, easily ripping apart the wood and making the doorway larger so that it could come inside. I tipped over the dining room table to use as a barricade. I picked up a chair, the only weapon I could find nearby, thinking I could throw it at the thing's face to defend us, when I heard a strange noise from the front. It was a car horn honking. Someone had come to save me. I heard a loud ding and pulled out my phone and saw the green check mark beside my group chat, indicating that at some point it had gone through, at some brief moment when there'd been a gap in the clouds. Reading the new messages brought a hopeful smile across my face. "Matt, you just had to skip town a day early and go ice fishing, didn't you?" "What the hell is that thing?" Ted was yelling from outside. "I don't know, but it's trying to get inside. Jay, are you there?" I shouted back that I was. There was a loud screech from outside, which I realized had come from the monster. They'd actually wounded it somehow. I ran to the front door with Gibson and looked out, seeing the creature for the first time. It stood with its back to us, its head among the treetops, even taller than it appeared at first. My friends had caught it off guard, but now it was fully aware of them, and it was going after them. The Wendigo was distracted by something in front of the cottage, and I realized that one of my friends had gotten out of the car and they were using themselves as bait so that I could flee the cottage safely. They had driven across the ice with their lighter vehicle, just as I had hoped to do. I guessed that they'd run into trouble moving the body of the giant bear which blocked the road. "Jay!" Ted screamed out the window, driving the car in a circle on the ice, as if too terrified to stay still. I raced over to the car, slipping and sliding on the ice. It was Matt who was distracting the Wendigo, I realized, and I called for him to get away from the thing. It was too large, too fast. He didn't know what he was dealing with, but that was Matt. He was always act first and think later kind of guy. Not only that, but he often put himself in harm's way for his friends. He turned to look at me and gave a thumbs up, his attention diverted from the creature for a split second. As Gibson and I got into the car, we heard his scream. I looked up to see the Wendigo, close the distance in an instant, and was picking him up like an insect, turning him over and beginning to bite him. As Matt screamed for help, the creature peeled off his skin, exposed his skull as it ate his face. The calls for help turned to bubbling gurgles and wet, choking sounds, and I nearly got out of the car to run after him, but Ted grabbed my wrist and pulled me back inside. "You can't save him," he said with wet-rimmed eyes, and eventually I relented. We raced our way across the icy lake, making a path through the blizzard, cutting a swath off the fresh-fallen snow on our way back to mainland. For a while, we debated what to do. Should we call the police? Our friend had just died, after all, but we knew that if we did, we'd be considered suspects. And with no other reasonable explanation, they'd pin his death on us. They'd say we'd killed him. There were no boxes they could check on an official police report citing a Wendigo attack. So, since such things didn't exist, being myths and legends, we'd be their only suspect. As it turned out, we didn't have to worry about it, though. A message popped up from Matt on the group chat just a few minutes after we got home, and I had to tell myself that it wasn't all just a nightmare, a hallucination from the cold and lack of sleep and food. But Ted and Greg both told me I hadn't imagined it. What we saw was real, as much as I wish it wasn't. The three of us read the message on the group chat again and again. My heart was beating fast, and a sick knot was growing in my stomach, bile rising in my throat that I could taste inside my mouth. "Hey guys, you really missed out on a feast. Ice fishing is just as much fun in a blizzard, if not more so. Let's reschedule the trip for next week, okay? I'll be waiting for you here." As much as we didn't want to go, we've resolved that we have to. We can't leave Matt like that. We have to help him. Next week, we're making the trip back up there, even if it kills us. I never thought I'd dread waking up, but here I am, eyes squeezed shut, praying that when I open them, I'll see something, anything different. My name's Marcus Thomas, 32 years old, and I'm trapped in a nightmare that I can't escape. It started like any other day. I remember it perfectly. Every little detail. The smell of coffee brewing downstairs. The sound of Aisha humming in the kitchen. The warmth of the sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. I sat up, stretching, and glanced at the clock. 7:15 a.m., right on schedule. I padded downstairs, following the scent of breakfast. Aisha stood at the stove, her back to me, swaying slightly as she flipped pancakes. Her dark curls were piled up on her head, and she wore my old college t-shirt, the one with the hole in the sleeve that she refused to throw away. "Morning, beautiful," I said, wrapping my arms around her waist and planting a kiss on her neck. She laughed and leaned back against me. "Morning, sleepyhead. I was beginning to think you'd sleep through your alarm again." "Not a chance," I replied, reaching around her to snag a piece of bacon from a plate on the counter. "Can't be late today. Big presentation, remember?" Aisha swatted my hand playfully. "How could I forget? You've been stressing about it for weeks." We ate breakfast together, chatting about our plans for the day. Aisha had a busy schedule at the elementary school where she taught 3rd grade. I had my presentation to the board, which could lead to a big promotion if it went well. As I was finishing my coffee, Aisha glanced at her watch. "Oh, I better get going. Parent-teacher conference this afternoon, so I need to get there early to set up." She stood, grabbing her bag and her keys. I rose to walk her to the door, as I always did. "Knock 'em dead, babe," she said, stretching up on her toes to kiss me goodbye. "You're gonna do great." "Thanks. Have a good day." "Love you," I said, squeezing her hand. "Love you too," she called over her shoulder as she headed for the car. I watched her pull out of the driveway, waving as she drove. Then I went back inside to finish getting ready for work. The day passed in a blur of meetings and last-minute preparations. By the time my presentation rolled around at 3 p.m., I was running on pure adrenaline and caffeine. But it went well, better than I'd hoped, actually. The board seemed impressed, and my boss even hinted at that promotion as we wrapped up. I was on cloud 9 as I packed up my things, ready to head home and celebrate with Aisha. I pulled out my phone to call her, wanting to share the good news right away. That's when everything changed. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice I didn't recognize answered it. "Hello? Is this Marcus Thomas?" My stomach dropped. Something in the woman's tone sent ice through my veins. "Yes, this is Marcus," I replied, my voice suddenly hoarse. "Who is this?" "Mr. Thomas, this is Nurse Reeves at Mercy General Hospital. I'm calling about your wife, Aisha. There's been an accident." The world tilted on its axis. I grabbed the edge of the desk, knuckles turning white. "What happened? Is she okay?" The pause before the nurse responded lasted an eternity. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Thomas. Your wife was brought in about an hour ago. There was a multi-car pileup on the highway. The doctors did everything they could, but I'm afraid she didn't make it. I'm so sorry for your loss." The phone slipped from my hand, clattering on the floor. This couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake. I'd just seen Aisha this morning. We made plans for dinner. She was fine. She had to be fine. The next few hours passed in a haze. Somehow, I made it to the hospital. I remember the harsh fluorescent lights, the antiseptic smell, the pitying looks from the staff, and then seeing her lying there so still, so unlike the vibrant woman I'd kissed goodbye this morning. I don't know how long I sat there, holding her hand, willing her to wake up, to smile at me once more, to tell me this was all a cruel joke. But she didn't. Eventually, a gentle-voiced doctor came to take me away, to discuss arrangements I couldn't begin to comprehend. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember climbing the stairs to our bedroom. Our bed, where Alicia would never sleep again. I just remember collapsing onto the mattress, still in my suit, and praying that when I woke up, this would all be a terrible dream. Sleep came, eventually, a blessed escape from the crushing weight of grief. And then I opened my eyes. The smell of coffee drifted from downstairs, sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. For one blissful moment, I thought my prayers had been answered. Then I heard it. Alicia humming from the kitchen. I sat bolt upright, heart pounding, the clock on the nightstand reading 7:15 a.m. Impossible. I scrambled out of bed, nearly falling in my haste to get downstairs, and there she was, Alicia, alive and well, standing at the stove in my old college t-shirt, flipping pancakes. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said, glancing over her shoulder at me. "I was beginning to think you'd sleep through your alarm." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. This was impossible. "Marcus?" Alicia's smile faded, replaced by concern. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I crossed the kitchen in 2 slides, pulling her into my arms so tightly that she let out a surprised oof. "Whoa, what's gotten into you?" she laughed, returning the hug. "Bad dream," I managed to choke out, burying my face in her hair, breathing in her familiar scent. "Really, really bad dream." Alicia pulled back, cupping my face in her hands. "Well, you're awake now. Everything's fine, okay?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, because suddenly I remembered I'd lived this before. Yesterday morning. The morning Alicia died. As we ate our breakfast, my mind raced. Had it all been a dream? Some kind of stress-induced hallucination? It had felt so real, so visceral, but here was Alicia, alive and well, talking about her parent-teacher conference as if nothing had happened. I tried to shake it off, the lingering dread, as Alicia gathered her things to leave, but as she reached for her car keys, panic seized me. "Wait, don't drive today, please," I blurted out, grabbing her wrist. She frowned. "What? Why not?" I scrambled for an explanation that wouldn't make me sound insane. "I have a bad feeling. Can you carpool with someone, or could I drive you?" "Marcus, I can't just change my plans at the last minute. I need my car for errands after work, remember?" She studied my face, worry creasing my brow. "Are you okay? That must have been some nightmare." I forced a smile, trying to appear calm. "Yeah, sorry. I'm fine. Just be careful. I love you." "I love you too," she replied, still looking concerned. "Try not to stress too much about your presentation. You're going to do great." And then she was gone, just like before. I watched her pull out of the driveway, my heart in my throat. I spent the morning in a state of high anxiety, jumping every time my phone rang. But as the hours ticked by with no bad news, I started to relax. Maybe it really had just been a nightmare. My presentation went well, just as it had in my dream, memory. I wasn't sure what to call it anymore, so as I packed up my things afterward, I decided to call Alicia, just to put my mind at ease. The phone rang twice, 3 times. "Hello, is this Marcus Thomas?" Ice flooded into my veins. Same voice, same words. "Mr. Thompson, this is Nurse Reeves from Mercy General Hospital. I'm calling about your wife, Alicia. She's been in an accident." No. This couldn't be happening. Not again. "What happened?" I demanded, even though I already knew the answer. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Thompson. Your wife was brought in about an hour ago. There was an accident at the school where she works. A student parent became violent, and I'm afraid Alicia didn't make it. I'm so sorry for your loss." The phone slipped from my numb fingers. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But as I raced to the hospital, as I saw Alicia's still form once again, as I held her lifeless hand, I knew it was all too real. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the core that when I woke up tomorrow, it would all begin again. I don't know how many times I've lived this day now. 10, 50, 100, they've all blurred together in a nightmarish haze of grief and desperation. Each morning, I wake up at 7:15 a.m. Each morning, I rush downstairs to find Alicia alive, humming in the kitchen. Each evening, no matter what I do, I receive that dreaded phone call. I've tried everything I can think of. I've begged her to stay home. I've faked an illness, a family emergency. I've disconnected her car battery. I've slashed her tires. I've hidden her keys. I've called the school, bomb threats. I've tried to get it shut down for the day. Nothing works. If Alicia stays home, she dies in a house fire. If she can't drive, she takes the bus, which crashes. If the school closes, she goes to run errands instead and gets caught in a store robbery gone wrong. It's like the universe itself is conspiring to take her from me, over and over and over again. Today I decided to try a different approach. Instead of trying to keep Alicia home or safe, I'll stay with her all day. Maybe from there I can protect her. When she leaves for work, I follow in my car. She notices, of course, pulling over after a few blocks. "Marcus, what are you doing?" she asks as I approach her window, her voice a mix of confusion and concern. I need to be with you today," I say, knowing how crazy that must sound. "Please, Alicia, trust me. It's important." She studies my face for a long moment and then sighs. "Okay, get in, but you're explaining on the way." As we drive, I try to tell her the truth about the time loop, about her dying every day, about my desperate attempt to save her. Alicia listens silently, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Finally, she says, "Marcus, I think you need help. This isn't normal. Maybe we should go to the hospital instead of work." "No," I said, making her jump. No hospitals. Please, Alicia, just let me stay with you today. If nothing happens, I promise I'll get help tomorrow." She agrees, reluctantly. We spend the day together at her school. I hover anxiously, scanning for threats, jumping at every sudden noise. Alicia's colleagues give us odd looks, but she makes excuses about a family situation. As the final bell rings, I begin to hope maybe this time it'll work out. Maybe I've finally broken the cycle. We're walking to her car when I hear the screech of tires. I turn to see a car careening towards us, the driver slumped over the wheel. Time slows. I reach for her, trying to pull Alicia out of the way, but I'm too slow. Always too slow. The impact throws us both. I hit the ground hard, my vision blurring. When it clears, I see her lying motionless a few feet away, a growing pool of blood beneath her. "No," I whisper, crawling towards her. No, not again, please, not again." But it's too late. By the time the ambulance arrives, she's gone. I'm left once more with the certainty that tomorrow it'll begin again. The next day, I don't even get out of bed. What's the point? Nothing I do makes a difference. Alicia always dies, and I'm left alone with the grief. I hear her calling from downstairs, concern in her voice, but I can't face her. I can't watch her die again. Eventually, she comes up to check on me. "Marcus, are you okay?" I roll over, burying my face in the pillow. "Go away, Alicia, please." The bed dips as she sits beside me, her hands gentle on my back. "What's wrong? Talk to me. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me." So I do. I tell her everything, my voice muffled by the pillow, about the time loop, about watching her die over and over, but the failed attempts to save her. When I finish, silence stretches between us. Then Alicia speaks, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't understand what's happening, Marcus, but I believe that you believe it. And I'm here. Whatever this is, we'll face it together." I roll over, meeting her eyes. The love and concern I see there breaks something inside me. I pull her into my arms, holding her tight as sobs rack my body. We spend the day at home, talking, crying, trying to make sense of the impossible situation. As evening approaches, I grow increasingly anxious. "Maybe it'll be different this time," she says, squeezing my hand. Maybe staying home was the answer. I want to believe her, but as the clock ticks towards the dreaded hour, a sense of the inevitable settles over me. At 4:17, exactly when the call usually comes in, there's a knock on the door instead. Alicia moves to answer it, but I hold her back. No, let me. I open the door to find two solemn-faced police officers. Mr. Thompson, I'm afraid we have some bad news. There's been an accident. I don't hear them, because behind them on the street I see a familiar figure, a man in a dark suit watching us. As our eyes meet, he smiles, a cold, cruel expression that chills me to the core. Then he turns and walks away, vanishing into thin air. I slam the door shut, my mind reeling. Who was that? What did it mean? But there's no time to ponder, because Alicia's on the floor, clutching her chest, gasping for air. Heart attack. That's what the paramedics say when they arrive. Nothing anyone could have done. As I watch them take Alicia's body away, that strange man's smile haunts me. For the first time, I wonder if there's more to this nightmare than I realize. The next morning, I wake up with a new determination. If I can't save Alicia, and God, it kills me to even think that, maybe I can at least find out why this is happening. I go through the motions of the morning, hugging Alicia tightly before she leaves. Then I set out to find the man in the suit. I drive around town, watching for him. Hours pass with no sign. As 4:17 approaches, I find myself near the park where Alicia and I had our first date. There he is, sitting on a bench, feeding pigeons. I approach cautiously, my heart pounding. Who are you? Why are you doing this to me? He looks up, the same cold smile on his face. Ha, Marcus, I was wondering when you'd find me. You know my name? I know everything about you, Marcus. And Alicia. A chill runs down my spine. Are you... what? Are you God? The devil? The man's laughter rings out, harsh and mocking. Nothing so grand, I'm afraid. Think of me as an interested observer. Observer of what? I asked, my fist clenched at my side. He stands, brushing breadcrumbs off of his suit. Of you, Marcus. Of your pain, your grief, your desperation. It's all quite fascinating, really. Rage boils up inside me. I lunge at him, intent on wiping that smug smile off his face. But my hands pass right through him, like he's made of smoke. Now, none of that. We're just getting to know each other. Why? Why are you doing this? The man's smile fades, replaced by a look of cold curiosity. Why? Because I can. Because your suffering amuses me. Because I want to see how long it takes to break you completely. His words hit me like a physical blow. I stagger back, shaking my head in denial. No, this can't be real. You can't be real. Oh, I'm very real, Marcus. And this is very, very real. For you, at least. My phone rings. 4:17 p.m. I already know what I'm going to hear when I answer it. The man in the suit watches me, his head tilted in interest. Well, aren't you going to get that? I'm sure it's important news about dear Alicia. I want to run, I want to scream, I want to wake up from this nightmare, but I'm rooted to the spot, trapped in this moment of horror. As I raise the phone to my ear, the man in the suit begins to fade away, but his parting words echo in my mind long after he's gone. Sweet dreams, Marcus. I'll see you tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. The revelation of the man in the suit haunts me. Each day as I wake to the sound of morning routine, I'm torn between my desperate need to save Alicia and my burning desire to understand, to defeat this cruel entity that's toying with our lives. Today I decide to ignore him completely. I focus all my energy on Alicia, determined to find some way, any way, to break the cycle. "Let's run away," I blurt out over breakfast. Alicia pauses, fork halfway to her mouth. "What? Let's just go. Right now. Get in the car and drive until we can't anymore." She studies my face, concern etching lines around her eyes. "Marcus, what's going on? You've been acting strange for days now." I take her hand, willing her to understand. "Please, Alicia, trust me. We need to leave, now." Maybe it's the desperation in my voice, or maybe it's the love that's carried us through 7 years of marriage. Whatever the reason, Alicia nods. "Okay, well, let's go." We throw some clothes in a bag and hit the road. As we drive out of town, I keep glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man in the suit following us. But the highway behind us remains clear. For the first time in what feels like an eternity, I begin to hope. We drive for hours, putting miles between us and the town where Alicia has died 100 times. We laugh, we sing along to the radio, we reminisce about old road trips. As the sun begins to set, we pull into a small coastal town. "Let's stay here tonight," Alicia suggests, pointing to a quaint little bed and breakfast. I check my watch. It's 6:43. We made it past 4:17, past the time Alicia always dies. "We did it," I whisper, tears prickling in my eyes. "We really did it." Alicia squeezes my hand. "Did what, babe?" Before I can answer, a commotion down the street catches my attention. A crowd is gathered, pointing at something in the sky. "Is that a plane?" someone shouts. "It's flying awfully low." My blood runs cold. No, it can't be. The roar of engines fill the air. I grab Alicia, trying to pull her to safety, but it's too late. The plane crashes into the bed and breakfast in a deafening explosion of fire and debris. In the chaos that follows, the screaming, the sirens, the frantic attempts at rescue, I search desperately for my wife. Deep down, I already know. As I stand there, watching the firefighters battle the blaze, I feel a presence beside me. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" the man in the suit asks, his tone conversational. "That you could outrun fate?" I don't look at him. I can't look at him. Why? Why her? Why us? He shrugs, the moment visible from the corner of my eye. "Why not? Your pain is exquisite. Your love, your desperation, your growing madness, it's all so deliciously human. I'll stop you. Somehow, I'll find a way." His laughter's like broken glass. "Oh, Marcus, I do hope you try. It'll make this game so much more interesting." I wake up the next morning with a new plan. If I can't save Alicia by changing her fate, maybe I can save her by changing mine. I go through the motions of our morning routine one last time, savoring every moment with her. As she leaves for work, I kiss her deeply. "I love you," I say. "Always remember that." She smiles, a little puzzled. "I love you too. You sure you're okay?" I nod, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. Have a great day, babe." As soon as she's gone, I start gathering supplies. Rope, a chair, a notepad. I write Alicia a letter, pouring out everything, the time loop, the deaths, the man in the suit. I tell her how much I love her, how sorry I am I couldn't save her. I beg her to live a full, happy life. Then I prepare the noose. Just before 4:17, I position myself on the chair. My plan is simple. If I die first, maybe the loop will break. Maybe Alicia will live. As I stand there, heart pounding, the man in the suit appears. My, this is certainly a new approach. "Go to hell." "You first," he smiles, cold and cruel. I take a deep breath, close my eyes, and step off the chair. The rope pulls tight, and I wake up gasping, back in bed, 7:15 a.m. Another failed attempt. But something's different this time. There's no smell of coffee, no sound of Alicia humming downstairs. I rush to the kitchen, my heart in my throat. It's empty. It's cold. Alicia, I call out, panic rising. Alicia, where are you? She's not here, Marcus, a familiar voice says from behind me. I whirl to find the man in the suit lounging in my armchair, looking utterly at ease. What did you do? Where is she? He examines his nails, the picture of casual indifference. I didn't do anything. You did. What are you talking about? He sighs as if explaining to a particularly slow child. You changed the rules, Marcus. You died first. So now, she never existed. The world spins around me. I grab the counter to keep from falling. No, bring her back, please. I can't bring back someone who was never born, he says, standing. But don't worry. I'm sure we can find a new way to continue our little game. As the truth of what I'd done sinks in, I slid to the floor, a scream of anguish tearing up my throat. The man in the suit watches, a small, satisfied smile on his face. Well, shall we begin again? He asks, straightening his jacket. The world fades to black, and I brace myself for whatever fresh hell awaits. Because now I know the truth. There's no escape, no way to win, just an eternity of loss and pain, and the cruel smile of the man in the suit. But as consciousness returns, something feels off. The bed beneath me is harder than usual. The air smells different, antiseptic, sterile. I open my eyes to find myself in a hospital room. Machines beep steadily around me, and there, holding my hand, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, is Alicia. Oh my God, Marcus, can you hear me? I try to speak, but my throat is dry, raw. Alicia holds a cup of water to my lips. What happened? You've been in a coma for 3 months. There was an accident on your way to work. The doctors, they weren't sure you'd ever wake up. My mind reels. A coma? Was it all a dream? The time loops, the deaths, the man in the suit? As if summoned by my thoughts, I see a flicker of movement by the door. The man in the suit stands there, watching. But this time, his smile doesn't seem cruel. It's almost approving. He nods once, then vanishes. Marcus, are you okay? Alicia asks, her voice pulling me back. Should I call the doctor? I look at her, really look at her. My beautiful, vibrant, alive wife. Whatever happened, whatever was real or not real, none of it matters now. I'm okay. Everything is okay, I say, squeezing her hand. As Alicia calls the doctor, I close my eyes, savoring the feeling of her hand in mine. I don't know if I've won, lost, or simply been released from some cosmic game, but I do know one thing. I'll never take a single moment with Alicia for granted again.